Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we are going to review proper fractions, improper fractions, and mixed numbers. First, let's start with the definitions of each. A proper or an improper fraction is a fraction with both an integer numerator and an integer denominator. Integers, these are numbers that contain no decimals or fractions themselves. So examples of integers, we might have -7 or 0, 13. Some non-integer numbers. So notice that the integers do not contain decimals or fractions. Non-integers would include 6.3 or 1/2, pi, the square root of 3. Those would be non-integer numbers. So integers, no decimals, fractions, no weird square roots or anything, no irrational numbers, just no decimals, fractions, those types of numbers. For the purposes of this slide, we're going to call this particular integer m, so the integer in the numerator will be m, and the integer in the denominator will be n. A proper fraction is when the value of the numerator is less than the value of the denominator, such as our example of a non-integer, 1/2. Now you'll notice that 1/2 is a proper fraction because both the numerator and denominator, the numerator is 1, the denominator is 2, those are both integers, so that's okay, and the numerator is less than the denominator. Generically speaking, we would say that a proper fraction contains m is less than n, such as 1/2. We could also see 2/7, we could see -14 over 19. So the negative doesn't really have anything, we don't associate it with the numerator or denominator. In this case, we're just saying that this is a proper fraction because if we ignore the sign, 14 is less than 19. So those are our proper fractions. We can do two things with proper fractions. We can possibly simplify them. So the three examples I put here cannot be simplified, but if we had something like 6/22, we could simplify that because 6 and 22 have a common factor of 2. So we would simplify it by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 2, giving us 3/11. But both 6/22 and 3/11, those are both proper fractions. The only other thing we can really do with a proper fraction is we can convert it to its equivalent decimal. I'm not going to do that here. There are plenty of videos, if you don't know how to do that, that you can watch if you need to practice that skill. But proper fraction, the numerator has a value that is less than the denominator. An improper fraction is when the value of the numerator is greater than or equal to the value of the denominator, such as 4/3, that would be improper because 4 is greater than or equal to 3. We could have 19/12. We could have 6/1. And now what we notice is that, wait, 6/1, that's just 6, and that's true, but 6/1 is an improper fraction. So we might say, generically speaking, that an improper fraction is when m, the value of the numerator, is greater than or equal to the value of the denominator. With improper fractions, they can become one of two things. We might write them as one of two things. They might be equivalent to an integer, such as that example 6/1 just becomes 6. Or we might write it as its equivalent mixed number. And in this case, I'm also assuming that it's already simplified, or we might simplify it later. But improper fractions, we generally convert them to one of two things, either their equivalent integer or their equivalent mixed number. And if they do convert to a mixed number, we could also hypothetically write it as a decimal, which we're not discussing in this video. So if the denominator is a factor of the numerator, then it's equivalent to an integer. So 4/1, that's equivalent to 4, because 4 divided by 1 is 4. 30/6, that's equivalent to 5. -28/2, that's equivalent to -14. So these would be improper fractions that actually are equivalent to integers. We would just write the integer and we would be done. But what we want to focus on now is when we can write them as a mixed number. So if the denominator is not a factor of the numerator, then we can write it as a mixed number. A mixed number is really just the sum of an integer and a proper fraction that are squished together. So this is very unique in mathematics. Usually when two things are squished together, it implies multiplication. But in the case of mixed numbers, it implies addition. So 4.5 literally means 4 plus 1/2. -8 and 9/10. So notice when I say it, I use the word and, which again by itself means addition. Negative 8 and 9/10, this one's a little bit sneaky because that negative belongs to both parts. This is negative 8 and negative 9/10. So we have to be really careful when we do have the negative mixed numbers. And then 7 and 2/17 is equivalent to 7 plus 2/17. Okay, so those are what mixed numbers are. Now the question is, how do we go from improper fraction to mixed number, or mixed number to improper fraction? Okay, we're going to look at the steps for going from an improper fraction to a mixed number first. See how many times the denominator goes into the numerator. You might be able to do this in your head. Otherwise, you can just set up long division. The answer to step 1 is the whole part of the mixed number. The amount left over from the division becomes the numerator over the original denominator. Then we just want to see if the fraction can be simplified. So looking at some examples, 27/4, I might be able to do this in my head. So 4 goes into 27 6 whole times because 6 times 4 is 24. So I'm going to say that this is going to be 6. If I was to do this division, remember 6 times 4 is 24, that would leave 3 left over. So we put 3 in the numerator over 4 in the denominator. Then we want to see if it can be simplified. It cannot. So what I'm saying is that 27/4 is equivalent to 6 3/4. The second example, we have negative 147/9. If it's negative as an improper fraction, it will also be negative as a mixed number. When I'm going to do the conversion, I can't do this one in my head. I don't know how many times 9 might go into 147, so I am going to set up long division. When I set up the long division, I'm going to just not include the negative sign. I'm just going to say, okay, this is going to be equal to something negative. Now I'm going to go off to the side, and I learned division in the United States, and this is how I learned it. I know in other countries you might have learned it another way, but this is how I learned it. So 9 goes into 14 one time, minus 9. 14 minus 9 is 5. I bring down the 7. 9 goes into 57 6 times, that's 54, minus 54, and I have a remainder of 3. So this is my remainder. This is what gets left over the original denominator. So here's my whole part, and then this becomes a fraction. The remainder becomes a fraction over the divisor, over 9. So I end up with negative 16 3/9, which can be simplified. So when I say it can be simplified, I mean that the proper fraction can be simplified. 3 and 9 have a common factor of 3. I divide them both by 3, and I end up with negative 16 1/3. So negative 147/9 is the same as negative 16 1/3. And the fact that I could simplify the mixed number meant I could have simplified the improper fraction to start out. So I could have simplified first and then converted, but I found it easier to actually, since I couldn't do the math in my head, I'll just worry about that later. What about going the other direction, converting from mixed numbers to improper fractions? First, what we'll do is we'll multiply the denominator to the whole number. I'm going to explain why we do that in just a minute. Then we're going to add the numerator to that product. Lastly, the answer in step 2 is the numerator over the original denominator. Okay, so why do we do step 1? Because if we don't know why, we might forget this rule and then not know what to do. All right, we have negative 6 1/3. So remember what I said, that this is secretly an addition problem? So I'm going to ignore the negative sign, but remember when I technically write it, it should be negative 6 plus negative 1/3. But just for the conversion, I'm going to ignore it, and I'm just going to know that my improper fraction will also be negative. So this is 6 plus 1/3. And if I wanted to add these, I would need a common denominator. Well, 6, we need to give it a denominator, so we turn it into an improper fraction by putting it over 1. Now I need that common denominator. The common denominator will be 3. I multiply this by 3 over 3. This gives me 18/3 plus 1/3. Now that I have the same denominator, I add across the top. 18 plus 1 is 19, and we keep the common denominator. So the steps that I put above are the shortcut for actually going and doing the actual mathematics of adding the fractions. Multiply the denominator to the whole number. That's what gave me that common denominator. Then we add the numerator to that, because remember, this gave me that common denominator plus the extra thing, the remaining part. And then we combine those and we leave it over the original denominator. So now you know why these steps work, which I think is super, super important. We don't need to do this every time. I just want to make sure you know how to do it. So here we're going to take the denominator, multiply it to the whole part. Remember what that's doing? That's just creating a common denominator. That would be 108. If you don't know that, of course, you would go off to the side and multiply. Then we're going to do 108 plus 5, which would be 113. And we end up with 113 over 12. So there's my final answer there. I just want to double check that I did include the negative here, because remember I kind of ignored it. And generally speaking, if the mixed number, the proper fraction cannot be simplified, you won't be able to simplify the improper fraction either. 5/12 can't be simplified, so I'm all set there. You want to make sure that you're very clear on if you can leave your answers as improper fractions or if you need to convert them to mixed numbers. Mixed numbers are nice because it does give you a kind of sense of where the number is. If I look at 113 over 12, I don't immediately know that it's in between 9 and 10 on a number line, but if I see 9 and 5/12, I definitely know it's between 9 and 10. So improper fractions are nice, but if you can leave your answer, mixed numbers are nice, but if you can leave your answer as an improper fraction, that's just one less step that you have to do. So check with your instructor or your platform to see how you're supposed to leave your answer. This has been a video on proper fractions, improper fractions, and mixed numbers. Thank you for stopping.